thank you for joining. My name's Dr. Trefor Morgan, and yeah, thank you for joining the webinar today. The topic is detecting driver drowsiness on mine sites, and we're looking specifically at performative versus impactful actions. Let's start. The aim of this webinar is that you will leave with a clear framework for what metrics to track, how to interpret them, and what actions to take. You will be an expert in how to use drowsiness data to make safer operational decisions. Let's start with a couple of questions, though, in the chat. Please, if you can, answer these two questions. You can either use the group chat channel, which will share the answers with everyone, or you can send it directly to me if you want to just directly message me. That's also fine. So the two questions are, what drowsiness metrics are you currently using? And on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you with the site's current approach to managing drowsiness? So I'll just give people a chance to answer those. I'll also navigate to chat. There we go. Okay, so I can see a couple of answers coming in. Some people are saying yawning is a 4. That's fairly confident on the sites. A 2. Okay, that's really good feedback. Thank you everyone for that. Also, if there's any questions that you have during the presentation, please use that chat feature, and I'll endeavour to answer them at the end of the presentation if we've got time, and if not, we'll ensure that all questions are answered and sent out via email after the presentation. Okay, so first, I'm going to cover two areas today. The first one is what is performative and what is impactful actions. And I'll detail the differences between these in the next couple of slides. I'll then discuss the importance of a solid drowsiness measurement and how that can be used to enable long-term improvement. I'm just seeing a few more people coming in. We'll let them in. All right. So here are some examples of performative versus impactful actions we have seen across fleets. So on the left here, we have performative. On the right, we've got impactful. The first one is invalid metrics. So invalid metrics are something we unfortunately still see out in fleets. And some examples of those are yawns, steering wheel reversals, heart rate variability, and other metrics with very weak correlation to impairment. We regularly hear about systems tracking yawning, and yawnings are triggered. It's a biological response to an excess of carbon in your lungs, and the body wants to expel the carbon dioxide and bring in oxygen, which makes you more alert. And if a system is designed to beep at you every time you yawn, you're being trained not to yawn, and this is going to make the mine site more likely to have an accident. And in our 18 years of measuring impaired people in the lab and in the field, yawns are not a good indicator that someone is impaired due to drowsiness. Impactful measure, so valid ones, are ones that are have scientific evidence behind them and a strong correlation with impairment, such as the Optalet Johns drowsiness scale. And the characteristic there is as that number increases, the likelihood of an accident increases. So they're correlated. And if you focus on these types of metrics, you'll be able to make your site safer. The next one is fitness for duty. The performative action may be asking the driver to do a sleepiness test. So for example, the Epworth sleepiness scale before each shift. And this is really a performative action. It's a box ticking exercise. It does give some indication of the operator's state, the driver's state at the start of the shift, but drowsiness is progressive and people can become impaired 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours into the shift, and the fitness for duty at the start will not reveal that. In addition, for example, ESS, it's a subjective test as well. You're asking the individual a series of questions that reveals their underlying sleep propensity, and really depending on that person not to lie or have bias in their answers, and also it's subjective. It depends on who you're asking. Where it's real-time monitoring is impactful. A true safety system must measure impairment on a minute-by-minute basis using an objective measure that does not rely on assessment by the driver. Next, we've got late-stage detection. So, for example, with long eyelid closures or head nodding. Now, these are signs of sleep. They're not signs of drowsiness. This happens after late-stage drowsiness, and this is far too late. At this point, the operator should have stopped driving when they were already dangerously impaired. So late-stage detection is like the analogy we used as a fire sprinkler. It triggers and puts out fire, but the damage is already done. Whereas the impactful measurement is early detection. So this allows you to detect drowsiness early when you can do something about it. And our analogy is it's like a smoke detector. It allows you to prevent the action before the damage is done. Okay, looking at some more performative versus impactful actions. Here on the left, we have performative action of creating the appearance of action without actually changing the risk profile. For example, reporting drowsiness as just a top, we've measured people today, tick, as opposed to driving actual change. And actual change can be done, once again, by a solid metric that allows you to identify high-risk drivers and not just in real time, but in the longer term, such as time of day patterns, risk hotspots, escalation, effectiveness, and trend reduction in response control. In a performative site, you'll hear management asking why are we still having accidents. And if the operation team doubles down on the current efforts, it's ineffective not because the team's not trying, but the methodology is fundamentally flawed. Whereas this early detection with a good metric allows you to predict to measure the early onsets of drowsiness and avoid incidents, near misses, and microsleeps happening. The final one here on performative scenario is the data is overwhelming the team. So there's a lot of reports, there's a lot of data coming in. There's yawns per minute, there's all sorts of things. But there's really a gap in understanding of why these metrics are being tracked and what they mean. Whereas the impactful is understanding what the underlying metrics are and going beyond just reacting to alerts and become proactive in managing the drowsiness on the site. So really what this slide shows is that a safety system should provide actionable insights into the key risk areas and be able to quantify the effect of any remedial actions put in place. And the fact that each of you has taken time to attend this webinar indicates that you are focused on the impactful side rather than mere box ticking. That's fantastic. And we want to ensure you have all the right tools to move even further into the impactful area. So let's unpack now exactly what impactful actions look like. So the next question is, how do you use data to drive impactful actions? And the simplest way is to break it down into 3 levels. First is immediate response. So who needs attention right now? The second is shift management. So what's happened during the shift? How do I manage my workers in the shift? And then there's long-term operational optimization. And these are controls to reduce risk over time at the, say, the site level, introducing new OH&S policies around drowsiness, and how can you improve risk on the site. So now let's look at the various views of data to discuss how this may be responded to at each levels. And I will use OptAlert products, but you'll be able to think about how you're addressing drowsiness in your workplace and how different aspects of these may be missing or how they could be improved. So let's start with the immediate response. At the immediate response level, you see a clear picture. You want to see a clear picture of what is happening across the entire operation right now. Is there anyone at risk? And it should reveal the status of each driver, including are they being monitored and are they in a low risk, medium risk, or high risk state. And alerts should be erased when drivers transition to a state of medium risk or high risk. And then those people in high risk should be prioritized, or those people at risk should be prioritized. And the key here is that action should be taken in real time. And we can see here, this is a fleet-wide status, and at the moment, the current status of all the drivers are in low risk. So that's great. That's what you want to see. But here's a picture of some time later, where a driver has now had a medium risk alert. So that driver's at a medium risk of having an accident. Their impairment has risen. It's been triggered by the system, and an action should be taken. Now, the action doesn't have to be the driver has to stop and go home. At medium risk, it can be still managed. This alert is also recorded in an event list, and that's an important distinction from status, because in 5 minutes' time, this person's risk may have dropped. They've caffeinated, they've had a break, which is great, but you still want to know that this event happened and that you deal with it appropriately. When a risk occurs, it's important to look, or an alert occurs, it's important to understand the context of that. And that's what I hope to show on this slide. This is what we call the risk record. And it gives you a broader context of what's happening with that alert that's just occurred. And when deciding on how to respond to alert, it's useful to consider a number of questions, such as, has the operator had previous alerts or notable events at this shift? How many hours are left in their shift? And where are they spatially? Are they close to base? Because your action may differ depending if they're down the pit or up near the base. The context can inform your response, and depending on the circumstances, you may want to do, say, contact the driver, initiate a countermeasure, arrange a break for the driver, remove them from the task, or escalate the event through your organizational procedures. Now, looking at this example, so say this event at the top is the event we just saw, and it's just happened. So we'd open this risk record. We'd see from this straight away that they previously had a medium risk. 40 minutes ago, they had a medium risk, and looking at the map, they were down the pit when that happened. And one of the operations staff in the central the monitoring team has put an annotation, which I've blurred out for this case. So it might have said, driver was assessed, they're okay for now, but we should continue to monitor them. Then we see the current alert, and this has happened now when they're coming out of the pit. And this is their second alert in an hour. And that may now trigger a different action from the operations team. Potentially because they're leaving the pit, they might say, okay, we want this driver to get back to the unloading area. We'll talk to them whilst they're doing that. And when they get there, we'll give them an exercise break or maybe a nap. Or if this had been a high risk alert, their decision might have been, okay, we'll actually swap this driver out and get them properly rested, get a fresh driver in there. So the best sites will also review data on a daily report that has a total number of alerts. So for example, in this report we have here, it shows the daily drowsiness levels on a minute-by-minute basis in a single vehicle. And in this vehicle, there's been 5 drivers during this day. And it shows the level of drowsiness that's occurred across the entire time. And a monitoring team may look at this for the whole shift and work out if there's anyone that needs further attention. Now, in this example, the report is pretty typical for a truck, and it's actually pretty good. So no one's had a medium risk or a high risk. You can see that during the evening period, the risk does rise, so the JDS goes up. But this is to be expected given the time of day. This is late at night, and probably isn't cause for alarm. And the reason the JDS goes up at this time is the body's circadian rhythms, your core temperature drops, and you become more drowsy. It doesn't mean you can't drive and operate. It's just a riskier time. You can also see that this site gives breaks around the 1:30 and 3 o'clock. So during this period, which is the most dangerous period from a core body temperature point of view, this is the period you want to protect. Down here, and I'll start going a bit faster just for want of time. On this report, we can also see that the drivers were using the system correctly. This is really important that you monitor the usage of the system as well, because if you get no alerts and it's because no one's using the system. That's not particularly helpful. You want people to be using the systems all the time. You want to see alerts when they actually happen. Finally, we want to bring you back to the team and looking at the team and determine what follow-up needs. And this team on this drive is actually really good. No medium risk, no high risks, large percentage time of running or using the system correctly. So this is a really good shift. Now, if you step up another level, and that is looking at how things, or maybe a driver is performing over a number of shifts, because a driver will occasionally have high risk events, and maybe they had a poor night's sleep combined with a boring shift. However, if this reoccurs over an extended period of time, then there's an issue that you need to address. There could be some systematic issue going on. And that means looking at the data in an aggregated form. And this is super important. This drives you beyond just real-time alerts, which are very important. And this example shows a week of 107 drivers and their risk aggregated over that week. And this is pretty typical. What we see is a large number of drivers are well under the site average, then you have ones above, and then maybe you have some outliers. So here we have 2 and maybe a third outlier. And this doesn't mean that the driver is unsafe, but it should prompt an investigation. And this weekly analysis allows you to look for these patterns. And you can do this monthly as well, look at a month. We've seen examples where sites have identified the driver at the top of the risk profile, and they've been sent to a sleep specialist, and they were diagnosed with sleep apnea, which is stopping breathing during a sleep, which breaks your sleep cycle and makes you drowsy and dangerous to drive. That person received CPAP treatment, and immediately their risk score dropped to low levels. And they could see that by running this report again the week after. So very, very useful aggregation of data. Here's another example, looking at a different one. We're not looking at individuals now, we're actually looking at sites. So this is where a supervisor can zoom out. They can look at, from a company point of view, maybe in this example, they've got 5 sites. Are any of the sites falling behind others? Maybe they need additional training or equipment. Maybe there's a different type of shift roster on that site, which is causing problems, but it should be investigated. And this comparison gives you a baseline, and then you can see exceptions or anomalies. And it's a very powerful method to use. And then finally, how to use at this level, how to use data to drive actions. What we're trying to do here is you've detected repeated risk events, and this information should be housed in a central location that you can access. And an impactful system should identify these patterns across multiple drivers, shifts, and operating periods. And this might include repeated drowsiness events, or it could also include other other OHS risks outside of drowsiness as well, or operational breaches. And it should follow an effective 3-step system. That is to identify the top risk events that happen in a given period, which is usually done on weeks or per week or monthly basis, and then clarify the risk event. For example, through video footage, which is shown here, and then turn your findings into follow-ups, actions. Maybe there's corrective actions or support that the driver needs to prevent future occurrences. And in this example, we're looking at actually a compliance issue. This is where the system's not being used properly. And the questions would be, is that due to a lack of training? Is an equipment issue? Are the shift procedures not being followed? And the fact the system's identified this issue allows you to follow it up. That's long-term optimization, not just detecting events, but prioritizing their importance and continually improving the controls around them. And in our experience, the real-time response, which is super critical, with an accurate underlying metric will allow you to drive your risk down by about 85%. And then the long-term improvements allow you to maintain that level and then drive it further down to, and we've seen up to 98% reduction in risk on really well-managed sites. And what you see is at these sites, they're no longer talking about loss of revenue due to crashes. They're talking about productivity gains due to improved driver performance. And that's the state we want to see our sites get to. This final level is customized dashboards. So now that you understand the data, your team can proactively think about other views of the data and incorporate it with other data, such as location, maybe through the dispatch system. There's different vehicle maintenance logs. There's a whole bunch of data you can bring together and use with drowsiness. And I'll give an example rather than go through this slide in detail. So one customer, um, which hadn't had any accidents to date, but they wanted to understand where on their route was most dangerous from a drowsiness impact point of view. This site had a mine in the mountains and had a delivery point down the mountains at a seaport. And they aggregated a week of data, of drowsiness data, against location, and they formed a heat map. And it was against their initial intuition, but the most dangerous part of the route was not the treacherous winding descent, it was the flat section after the mountains heading towards the seaport. The drivers were very vigilant in the mountain, as one false turn would lead to catastrophe, but when they hit the long, boring stretch of road, they became less vigilant, and impairment due to drowsiness reached critical levels. However, given it was a two-way public road, a truck drifting into oncoming traffic would have had catastrophic consequences. So the customer introduced an OH&S policy that required drivers to take a break and caffeinate, but when they got to the bottom of the mountain. And then they were able to remeasure these drivers, and they could see that with this intervention, the risk was dramatically reduced in that previously dangerous section. So the key is collect reliable objective data, analyze the risk, take action, and then reassess. To finish with, I'll look at one final case study, and let's look at this one. This is a case study at a large mining operation in South America. They were interested in moving from a 3-shift schedule to a 2-shift, so 12-hour 2 shifts. And they were concerned, and rightly so, that the shifts would increase drowsiness risk, going to 2 12-hour shifts. But there were very big advantages to them in changing the scheduling and productivity gains for only having 2 shifts. But rather rely on assumptions, what we did was we helped conduct a controlled 3-week pilot with this group of whole truck drivers. And we looked at the drowsiness patterns. First of all, with historical data for the 3 shifts, and then with the 2 12-hour shifts. And as part of the 2 12-hour shifts, they also did a couple of really key things. One is they were then static shifts. So everyone was either on the first shift or the second shift. They didn't swap. Drivers did not swap between shifts. And they also ensured that people had regular breaks, actually scheduled breaks, and did exercise in those breaks. And here's the data. I realize we've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll really race through this. At the top, we can see the original risk levels against time. And the first 9-hour shift, very low. The second one, the risk actually got pretty high towards the end, and the graveyard shift of 6 hours got high towards the end. You can see why it's called the graveyard shift. They then moved to 2 12-hour shifts, and they're expecting to see it peak at the end of both shifts. But what they actually found was, because of the way they had restructured their rostering and the enforced exercise breaks, the risk across both shifts was dropped dramatically. And this site has been far safer ever since. Now, I'm not advocating everyone goes to 12-hour shifts. You need to make sure you do that second part, and you also have the ability to monitor drivers and ensure that they don't pose a risk. For this site, that resulted in a shift with this new shift roster. They had a 40% reduction in risk across the site, which is an absolutely phenomenal result. So, key takeaways. First of all, the biggest takeaway is data is important. Impactful drowsiness measurements start with the data, and you need to use an objective measure of driving impairment. This data then needs to be analyzed in order to identify key risk areas and steps that can be taken to reduce the risk. And once you have identified a risk and a potential way of reducing it, it is time to take action, implement the risk reduction ideas, and then collect more data. So you go back around the circle, see if the risk is reduced, was it effective, look into the next highest risk, analyze it, do some more actions. And we've seen customers and sites do this year on year and achieve excellent results year on year over 10-year periods. So thank you for attending this webinar. Uh, I'll now quickly have a look at the chat, but I fear, and also the private messages. There were a number of questions sent also through prior to the meeting, and I've got a couple of questions here that have been sent directly to me. But given that we have gone the half hour, I want to respect everyone's time. And given that, we'll draw the presentation to a close here. However, all these questions that have been sent, we will answer. After this presentation, we will send through both the answers to these questions and the presentations. And if you weren't able to get the subtitles working, we'll get subtitles working in your preferred language. So thank you for attending the meeting. I hope this has been informative. We will hopefully have more in the future, and I look forward to seeing you then.